You know, you and I have talked about this. I've always wanted to do this with you and talk about the NSX, because when I had an opportunity to speak with you at some of these Cars and Coffees and some of the MN NSX meetups that we've had, you're extremely knowledgeable about it. And the knowledge is unique in that it's from a different perspective, from the dealer's perspective, the sales perspective, and you've gone and done actual training at the PMC. So, and you've driven. Were you driving at the PMC as well?
So I actually missed out on the PMC.
Okay.
So I got involved with Acura in late 2016. So the car had actually already been launched and was out, for sale. And as we got into 2017, I kind of took over the position with doing some of the NSX stuff. And then just this past year, actually earlier this year, I was invited out to the PMC by Mamadou, who's one of the heads of kind of sales in Acura world.
Okay. And the PMC, define that? It's in
so
Ohio.
It's the Performance Manufacturing Center in Ohio. It was built specifically for the NSX.
Okay.
So NSXs are kind of rolled around from station to station, put together by hand in the PMC. So it's kind of like an engineer and car manufacturer's kind of a dream, because they have a small little factory where they can do limited runs of like they did a PMC edition TLX and MDX. So it's just like, hey, let's build a couple hundred of these cars. We now have a factory that they can go and do that, which is really cool.
And when I saw a lot of the photos of the PMC and some of the videos that were available online, it reminded me of the Porsche factory.
Yeah.
Where it's just a clean room, you've got everybody in bunny suits, well, minus the headpiece, walking around and really taking pride in the work that they're putting forth in assembling a high-end vehicle.
Yeah, and they, it's a kind of an experiment in how they can build cars as well. So not only is the NSX kind of experimenting with some of these hybrid technologies, but a lot of the stuff in how the car is built is kind of an experiment on how are we going to build our next generation of cars. So like my favorite little fact I always share with people about the PMC is that they have carbon fiber Wi-Fi enabled torque wrenches at the factory. And so every single bolt on both of these cars, the torque is sent via Wi-Fi to a computer database, and every single torque spec of every bolt when it left this factory is stored. They don't know why, they have it in case they ever want to use it for something.
Yeah, that's an abundance of information, but for tracking purposes that may prove useful. And just like Google as a search engine, it's a data-driven engine. That's what it's about. It's not necessarily just a search engine, it's about data gathering.
Well, and you don't know when you're going to need that data, but you'd rather have it and find out you needed it later than figure out you need it and be like, oh, we should have probably stored that or saved that somewhere.
Exactly.
So there's just some cool things at the factory as you learn more about it. So earlier this year, I had been invited actually out by Mamadou, and I then got promoted from sales into more of the business and finance side.
Congratulations.
At our dealership. So that was really exciting. And then unfortunately between that and everything with the pandemic, that trip kind of just got canceled. So I was really excited for that. It's on hold. Yeah, we'll hope it's on hold. So I've never actually been out to the PMC, but I have done a lot of driving in various cars. Gosh, I think I'm up to 6 different ones that we've had at our dealership.
And just through Berkeley, okay.
Just through Berkeley. And I'm probably approaching about the 4,000 mile mark in terms of my behind the wheel time.
Yeah. Which is more than a lot of owners.
Yeah. There are some owners. I mean, you see cars out there that
barely
1,000 to 3,000 miles. So,
well, they're weekend cars.
Yeah.
And in many instances with the NSX, they will have other cars in addition to this one being one of their supercars.
Yeah.
So you are with Berkeley Acura.
Yep.
And you've been with them for how long?
About 3.5 years now.
Okay.
So it was December of 2016 when I started. I was 19 at the time. And so just kind of never had any experience in the business. Walked in the door and got offered a job and didn't really know what to expect.
But somehow you became the NSX specialist for Berkeley.
Yes. Within about 6 months of being with Berkeley, the story goes is we had one that was sitting on the show floor and it was behind my desk at the time. And so it's a car that everyone that comes in the show floor, they want to look at, they want to talk about it, they want to ask what it is. And so I was just getting drilled by questions all day long. And I was like, I should probably know what I'm talking about when people ask me questions on this car. So I kind of took it on myself to just learn more about the car. And I think the management team at the time just kind of saw, I was teaching myself all of this stuff. They said, why not give him the position of that NSX specialist? He already knows, pretty much everything that he needs to know. And so I just kind of breezed through what the NSX specialist training was. But really most of it was kind of self-taught even before I had that position, just out of a curiosity and, and an interest for the car.
But then you got formalized training in the vehicle as well. So that's what kind of makes this video a little bit unique, in that we do have a subject matter expert when it comes to the Gen 2 NSX. There are many people on YouTube and online that profess to know everything about NSX because they've read about it online. You live it, breathe it, you sell it, you've driven 4,000 miles in it, you hopefully will be at the PMC in Ohio. So, I mean, I think you are highly, highly qualified. My experience with the NSX, of course, is the Gen 2 that you see above. It's a 2017 NSX, and David was kind enough to bring one of our good buddies, John Wayne, his red NSX. You want to just quickly talk about John's car?
Yeah, John's also a 2017. I think it was a little bit later in the production year of 2017, but it's a pretty loaded up car. He's owned it for not quite 6 months, so he's still in its infancy, and he's done some fun stuff to it with exhaust and some mods and wheels and stuff, and so it's great for us to have another one driving around town that people can see.
Absolutely, and as you can tell from behind, these are two NSXs that couldn't be left well enough alone, and so there was a couple of modifications, visual and actual performance mods to these cars. Hopefully we'll be able to talk about that a little bit later in the program here. Topic one, I wanted to talk to you about the current state of the car economy. Today is May 27th, and so we're still a bit in the midst of the pandemic. Governor Walz of Minnesota has started to slowly open things back up, roughly at about 50% level. Even the local casino here, the Mystic Lake Casino, has now been back in full operation since yesterday with about 50% in attendance, which is pretty good. So I wanted to get an understanding, help the viewers understand what was pre-pandemic health of the car market. What did that look like before coronavirus hit?
So the market, I think, was very strong, and I think a lot of the data backs that. January and February is usually a very tough month in the car industry. If you talk to anyone that's kind of done sales or works in the industry, usually February is when you see a lot of people taking their vacations, especially in Minnesota, get out of the cold weather, but also that's just really when the market is kind of at its slowest. And then typically in Minnesota, naturally around auto show time, people get a little more excited. They're kind of going out, maybe the weather's a little bit warmer, and you start to see a little bit of a spring increase. And so usually January and February, they're just kind of miserable months. And
again, that's unique to Midwest.
Yes, for sure. You do see it a little bit more across the country. December is usually a very strong month just to close out the year, whether it's different programs and incentives or just people wanting to get that purchase in before the end of the year. And so January comes around and it's usually a little bit slower than what you're dealing with in December. I would say that's pretty nationwide. And so Cox Automotive, they're a massive company that runs a lot of our dealership software, and they put out some reports every month. And so January of this year was up, not quite, but almost 1% over January 2019.
Good.
So that was strong. And then February was up almost 3% from February of 2019. So the market was very, very strong. Our dealership had one of its best Februaries in over the last decade. And so we were really in, a strong position at the end of February. And March had actually started out fairly strong as well. And then about halfway through March, you just saw everything take a really steep dive as some of the shutdowns and things started to come through.
And it wasn't until the end of the month, March 28th, that the official stay-at-home order was issued by Governor Walz, which you would expect a slowdown in activity. But it sounded like midway was already starting to head there.
Yeah, about halfway through the month, we could tell It was more of a topic of conversation with people coming in. We didn't necessarily have, as many people coming in that were, maybe wearing masks or trying to, stay socially distant. But it was definitely a concern for us, and we saw a significant slowdown just as the news cycle on it, and we started to learn more information about what it actually was, because even now we're still learning a lot about it every day. In March there was a lot of unknowns, and so almost every day you came in and there was something new that we didn't know about it that we were learning.
Now, was this affecting both new and used cars equally?
Yeah, absolutely. New car sales in the Acura world are going to be a little bit slower than our used car sales. So both, I would say, were affected pretty heavily. I don't have actual numbers on kind of what our decrease was through March, but a little bit later we'll talk about some of the stuff that happened actually post pandemic.
Right.
But pre-pandemic the market was actually in a good place. It was very strong. I think there was a good sense from a lot of companies that it was going to be a good year specifically for Acura. We had some new releases coming out this year, so we were kind of riding that hype train into what was supposed to be just a huge year for us.
And the economy was very, very strong, not just for the automotive industry, but you can hear on the news all the time about unemployment, the strength of the dollar, and a very, very record low unemployment.
Yeah.
So that was the state of pre-pandemic.
Yeah.
And then of course March
It was a
hit.
big swing.
And so we've seen, major adjustments to dealerships, whereby my understanding is that they have some sales staff have been let go, just a smaller operation.
Yeah.
We're now also seeing things like rental car companies, because the travel industry has been affected significantly.
Oh yeah, they're one of the probably hardest hit from all of this.
And so in some of the new news that we've seen, Hertz is probably the biggest name that we've seen, and I've rented from Hertz on occasion. They're probably one of the top tier car rental companies, but they have not been the only ones affected. We have Enterprise, Alamo, Avis, Budget, all the major players that we're accustomed to seeing. And unfortunately, as we're entering now the summer months, when you would expect peak travel, and hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of cars being rented throughout the United States, internationally, they inevitably are going to be flooding the market with used vehicles.
So it's kind of an interesting, there's a lot of layers to some of the stuff with these car rental companies. So, Hertz specifically, I think their fleet is around 600,000 cars.
Okay.
And so the interesting thing with Hertz is that I believe it's about 29% of their cars are bought with a repurchase plan from the manufacturer. So it's almost like when you lease a vehicle and you can turn it in after 3 years, you know exactly what your expenses are going to be over those 3 years. They kind of have special deals with some manufacturers where they get some of their cars under a similar agreement.
Okay.
And so for them, those cars are a little bit easier to offload. They could potentially still come back to market, but the loss in value is more on the manufacturer side at the end of the day than on Hertz.
Right.
But the majority of their cars, about 71%, are actually sold to or leased to Hertz through a separate company. So it's like Hertz Financial, I don't know the exact name.
Some subsidiary.
Yeah. And so the way that subsidiary is set up is then they then have all of those vehicles securitized, and they sell them as bonds and things like that. And so now with Hertz filing for bankruptcy, this other company subsidiary is not involved in it. But everyone that owns these asset-backed securities, now basically they have to come to an agreement with Hertz about what do they do with these vehicles.
Right.
And so they could say, sell all 600,000 and get us our money. They could say, let's reduce the fleet by X amount and get some of the money out. It's really up to those two to come to an agreement. The earliest that the holders of the securities can sell the cars is 60 days. So if it comes to that where they're going to just liquidate the entire fleet, those cars would be about 400,000 cars, and that would happen kind of late July.
And so that's right around the corner.
Yeah, and that's a big kind of cloud hanging over the used car market right now.
Right.
Is this mass of cars that no one really knows what's going to happen with. So,
and this is a range of vehicles. I mean, Hertz has a luxury line of vehicles.
They sold off their limited edition Corvette Z06s. I think those sold in like a week. I think that was before they had even announced the bankruptcy, but it was kind of teetering on that.
Is there a collector market for those Hertz Z06s?
I'm not sure. I don't know much about them. I thought I read somewhere that they maybe made about 100 of them. I'm sure there is, for any sort of car where you're talking a very limited number of them, there tends to be a collector market that follows as well. So,
but that's already been gobbled up.
Oh yeah, those I think those, it was reported those were sold within a week. Okay. So I think there's probably a pretty strong market for them. I think it was also rumored that they were selling for like 60,000, which is below what a typical even Z06 Corvette of that year would sell for. So I think they were a good deal, and it was a rare car. So I think people were kind of snatching them up as an opportunity car.
Good. And I'm sure they were all gently driven.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, who doesn't baby their Hertz rental car?
Not me.
Yeah. And so it's an interesting kind of thing that that bubble hasn't quite burst yet. Okay. So as of right now, based on kind of the data that we have, the market's down about 18%, teetering on 19, 20%. Every day it kind of fluctuates. It goes up and down. For us as a dealership, MMR is really huge for buying cars at auction, for doing trade appraisals and values. And we actually got a notice saying don't use MMR right now because the tool is broken. There's not enough cars running through auction for our MMR data to be usable.
So it's not broken, it's just not as accurate as it can be because you don't have a large enough data pool.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so that's another big kind of bubble looming over the market, is a lot of these cars that are just sitting with the auctions not running. And so with just various shutdowns and the auctions that are running on a significantly smaller capacity than normal. And so you have these cars that are just sitting, whether they're at auctions or whether it's Hertz's fleet. The other problem with that is cars depreciate whether they're being driven or not.
Right. There's a cost to having it just sit there.
Absolutely.
Whether it be the overhead, the heating, cooling.
And so that's the other thing. Hertz specifically was probably set up for about 40% of their fleet to be stored at any given time. So now you're talking about 95% of their fleet not being used. They have to now go out and rent space to store cars. So you now have no cars being rented with no income, and you have more expenses to store these cars. And so what ultimately happened with the bankruptcy was that they missed a payment to their subsidiary for their fleet. And so that's when everything kind of collapsed, because the people that owned the securities then didn't get their money, and everything kind of fell apart. So I think with Hertz, it was kind of a company that was having some problems before all of this. I think they had 4 or 5 CEOs in the last several years, and they've had some struggles. That market is very competitive right now. And an interesting thing that I was reading, it was actually talking about how Uber and Lyft have impacted that market as well. Yeah. If you're traveling somewhere, like for me, if I was going to let's just say California, never been to LA before, would I want to stand in line at a rental car, fill out a very long contract that's typically not super favorable to me if something goes wrong, and then I'm driving a car that I'm unfamiliar with in a city that I'm unfamiliar with, where a lot of people now are just, when they arrive, opening an app on their phone, calling an Uber, and being driven to where they need to go.
Which is convenient.
It's the convenience aspect of it is I think having a big impact on that rental car.
But consumers also have one additional choice, which is to be able to use a Turo app in order to find a vehicle from private renters. And
Yeah.
same thing with the hotel industry, where
Yeah.
people can go on Airbnb and secure, you know, a beautiful place for maybe even slightly less.
Yeah.
So the internet space has really changed a lot of things, but it's given consumers more power.
Yeah, the consumers have a lot more options, and they get to choose where their dollar goes, and it's impacting some of these companies that have been around or industries that have been around for a long time as well. You know, to me, I think the interesting thing, I was just talking about this with someone the other day, was also with the pandemic. You know, Hertz relies on a lot of their vehicles being rented by businessmen that are traveling all over, and their cars are rented for their, you know, by their companies for them for a week or 2 weeks or whatever while they're traveling. Right now, with everyone, you know, a lot of people working from home and working remotely, companies kind of are starting to think, do I really need this huge office building where all my employees kind of come in and get centralized? Can I reduce my overhead costs by not having that? They're seeing employees are able to work as or more efficiently remotely than they were when they were coming into the office. And then I also think you're going to see a reduction in, you know, kind of that corporate travel, because why would we pay for all of our employees to go here when we can very easily do everything remotely and accomplish the same thing?
And things like Zoom and Google Meet have proven highly successful. And there is accountability. I mean, you've got a grid of individuals with heads, and you can't really goof off. I mean, you still have to pay attention. You have to be a part of an active part of the discussion. And so the takeaway is still probably just as effective as if you were all sitting together in a round table. I think there is some Zoom and Google Meet fatigue because it is being so widely used, but I think people are adopting it as a new standard, and it becomes more of an option. I don't think it'll ever eliminate the need to be able to meet people face to face, because you know, obviously we could have done this via Zoom or Google Meet, but I just prefer the old traditional method. Maybe it's because I'm old.
Well, and there's something to, you know, anytime it's through the, you know, a medium of watching it on a screen, there's a different sort of reaction or an energy to a conversation. So that can sometimes interrupt it. But I definitely think, you know, things like that can have a really big impact on the future of the car rental business. If they're seeing, if a lot more companies are allowing employees to work remotely and not holding these massive conventions or meetings where people have to travel all the time, it'll be interesting to see what the future of this market is for some of these other rental car companies.
So speaking of the future and how the car rental companies have to adapt in order to remain relevant, understanding that the business climate may change with less travel, it leads me to the next question, which is how dealerships are going to evolve. We've seen things like now whereby the dealerships are bringing cars to people's homes in order for them to test drive. Transactions can be done remotely, which is quite unusual, but they're making it happen. And even the maintenance experience is different. You're greeted with a gentleman or a lady with a mask, and you're in a waiting area 6 feet apart. So even that's a little different. And I recall yesterday I was at a dealership in Bloomington having my oil changed, and there were no cars inside, only one vehicle inside the actual waiting area. And before there would be at least a couple where you can see, but now they're mostly outside, understandably. But that has changed a lot. So for the next question I have for you is, how are dealerships evolving to understand how they're going to be able to remain relevant and profitable? Because right now they're getting pinched pretty hard. So back to adaptations. We were talking about the rental car market and how they have to adapt in order to fit with the current economic climate. But dealerships are not immune to that. You know, you mentioned pre-pandemic that you were doing really well in January and February, and up until the middle of March, things start to get a little bit slower. So how has your dealership evolved so that they can still remain relevant while still keeping the doors open?
It was initially, you know, very difficult. So when the stay-at-home order was initially issued, we basically saw almost the entire staff was either, you know, taking voluntary leave or being furloughed. And so we went from like a sales staff of about 14 or 15 between new and used cars, and every one of them was essentially furloughed. You had, you know, maybe a total of 10 people in the building to conduct, essential business. So people that needed maintenance on a car that they had to use because they were an essential worker.
Right.
Someone who was an essential worker who maybe their lease was up, or they were in an accident, they needed a new car. So at that time, we were only conducting essential business.
So for the furloughed employees, are
Yep.
they still on some type of reduced payroll? Are they filing for unemployment?
Yep. So they're filing for unemployment. So some people use some of their paid time off for a few weeks. Some people took just a straight up voluntary leave of absence. People that maybe had medical conditions could take FMLA. So there's a lot of different situations for different employees. I myself, I think, was 3 weeks on unemployment before I came back, and it finally got to the point then where they had conducted. We had some new policies we created for how we could conduct business safely, and so we started to slowly bring people back. So I was kind of in the first wave back because I could kind of double as doing sales and then also paperwork and financing for vehicles. And then we had 3 salespeople that we brought back, and then some additional technicians and shop crew as well.
Okay. How did these salespeople respond when you gave them the call that says we'd like to have you back?
It's an interesting call. For me, I was thrilled. So I had taken a 2-week leave and then had about 3 or 4 weeks on unemployment. So I had been gone a while. I was bored out of my mind, and I was just like, give me something to do. Give me somewhere that I can go that's not my 500 square foot apartment.
Yep.
And so I was thrilled. There's definitely a concern about, with the additional benefits on unemployment right now. Do people really want to get back to work? We haven't had any issues. Everyone kind of jumped right at the gun and said they would love to get back to work.
Potentially you can get paid a little bit more because of the unemployment, but then you're also racking your brain because you're bored out of your mind.
Oh, yeah.
I think humans like to be productive.
Oh, yeah.
For the most part.
For the most part.
Yeah, there's a few outliers that...
And, in our industry, it's typically people that are, self-motivated, hardworking.
A-types.
Because to be someone in sales, if you don't sell anything, you don't get paid.
Yeah.
So you can't just kind of show up and do the bare minimum and slide by,
right.
Because then you maybe can't pay rent or cover your bills for that month. So you have
pay for
to
performance.
come in. Yeah, you have to come in and you have to perform every single day and every single month.
Right.
And so a lot of these people, when you give them the opportunity to come back to work, they're jumping at it. They're like, yeah, I want to do this.
Good.
And so that has been really great for us. We have now a second wave of bringing back. So I would say in our sales staff, we're about 50% capacity. In terms of our business right now, I kind of have some numbers from Acura. So in March, overall Acura sales were down 51% from March of last year.
Okay.
And in April, they were down 57% from April of last year. So
March took a big hit.
It was
even though it was half of March.
Yeah.
But it took almost the same hit as it did in April.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And I'm assuming then May is similar.
Yeah. So May we'll have to see. I'm thinking May is going to be better than what March and April were, just based on our business. We've seen a lot more business starting to come back. Not nearly, enough to have a full staff, but our 50% staff is keeping fairly busy.
And what type of business are you seeing? Is it the new car sales, maintenance, used cars?
A lot of used cars. A lot of people who maybe are in a lease and need to get into something else. It's a pretty good mix. Our typical business at our store is going to be more used cars than new cars. But a good summer month we could do 60 new cars. Used cars, they could do double that if they're having a real good month. And so this month I think we're starting to get to the point where we're 50, 60 total cars sold. So it's a fraction of the business, but it's stronger than it was a month ago.
That's
and
right.
So it'll be interesting to see what the kind of nationwide numbers are as we kind of close out this month. But it feels like things are starting to come back a little bit in terms of our business. And I think as people start to get back to work, that's a big thing. It's hard to buy a car when your only income is unemployment. That just doesn't work. No one's going to underwrite you a loan
right.
With that. And so we've seen a few people that, you know, they maybe need a car, but they just can't until they get back to work.
Okay.
And so I think when we start seeing more people returning to work, we'll see a little bit of an uptick. But there's still a big bubble looming over, you know, the car market in terms of values on vehicles.
So I'm curious, when I speak with you again in a month or two, how that buyer confidence will change.
Yeah.
You know, people are now resuming work again, maybe at 50% capacity for some industries, but for them to be able to know that they have income coming in is a big confidence booster.
Yeah.
And if they're coming off lease, I mean, the question then becomes, do I get another Acura?
Yeah.
Do I get one on the same level? Do I have the option of being able to go up a level if I need to? Or do I find being conservative in this time makes more sense, and they say, I'm going to get a more economic,
I've seen a number of lease customers going the conservative route.
Okay.
I've seen them maybe going down a trim level from what they had last time. I've seen a number of people just saying, well, you know, rather than putting $10,000 down, maybe let's only do, you know, what tax and license is, just in case, you know, the uncertainty in the market right now. I'd rather have some of that money in my bank account versus, you know, lowering my monthly payment on this for right now.
Okay, so then are you also seeing more leases and longer loan periods?
I've definitely seen some longer loan periods, but also a surprising amount of cash purchases. So I think there's some people out there that have set themselves up well financially, where maybe they've been working throughout this all, or they're maybe retired and they see right now as an opportunity to get into something for a good price.
So these could be essential employees. These could be retired people with a nice nest egg. So that's interesting, because I was just about to ask you, what does that buyer's market look like right now? Because it may be different than that pre-pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we are seeing, I've seen an uptick in people that are just walking in and paying cash for their vehicle. And then the people that aren't are the people that are maybe saying, let's do a smaller down payment and maybe stretch out the term. Interest rates are really good right now, you know, for both new and used cars. And so it makes a lot of sense. Acura has some special programs for first responders where, you know, you can get up to $750 towards an Acura just for being a first responder. So there's some programs from manufacturers to help out right now. And, you know, the banks are helping with the rates as well.
That's good. And I do see some loan options where it's 0%.
Oh yeah.
Or, you know, 30, 60-day deferred payment type deal.
Yeah, I know Acura has never really dipped their toe in the 0%. Acura, their, you know, kind of best they'll ever go is like 0.9, which is still fantastic.
Yeah. Borrowing money is cheap nowadays.
Yes, absolutely. And so, you know, they've started to get into some of our certified pre-owned cars have a special 0.9. And it's definitely, you know, changed the way that some of our programs from the manufacturer work to help us as dealerships kind of keep business going.
So keeping business going as a dealership, you mentioned that a large portion of your business is the used car sales.
Yeah.
So are you finding now that you are purchasing less used cars? And so the lot becomes a bit more open?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's all about kind of finding the comfort level of, you know, how many cars can we keep right now to sustain what business may come in the door. But it's, you know, also a dangerous game. We don't want to get too many cars and all of a sudden that bubble bursts and then we're stuck with a bunch of cars that we own for too much. And so there's I have a tremendous amount of respect for the people at our dealership that are making those decisions on a daily basis, because I see that, you know, every day the market might tick up, you know, a little bit one day and then the next day it's back down. And so it's you really have to kind of study that. And you know, we've been doing a good job of getting cars that are going to turn over quickly, because the last thing you want right now is that a car that you're going to be sitting on for the next 60 days. Right. When, you know, the market in the next even 2 weeks could be drastically different than it is now.
Well, Acura is a part of Honda. Honda is a part of Acura. You know, Honda in general has more conservative-based cars, affordable, very, very reliable, of course. And then Acura is the luxury line. And so you would think, okay, well, during the pandemic, people are gravitating more towards Honda. But Acura, I mean, surprisingly, has quite affordable cars that are still great values.
Yeah. So actually, in February, it was interesting. The ILX, which is what I drive, was the fastest growing car in its segment, and it has the most buyers under the age of 35 of any car in that compact luxury sedan segment.
And they brought the A-Spec.
And they brought the A-Spec. So that's the other statistic for the beginning of this year. Any A-Spec package throughout our lineup, so every model now has an A-Spec package. There is twice as many buyers under the age of 35 for A-Spec models as there are for every other trim level buyers under the age of 35.
Okay, so you and I know.
Yeah.
Part of the reason why is because Acura hadn't really pushed the envelope for quite a while.
Yeah.
And they've got these badges, whether it be Type S or Type R, it really created an enthusiasm with the younger market. They were looking for performance. And we saw that in the late 90s. We also saw it in the early 2000s. And so Acura kind of got away from that.
Yeah.
And so I was pleasantly surprised when I heard, hey, the A-Spec's coming back.
Yeah.
And even if it's just a mild variant, it still denotes that there's something special about that vehicle.
Yeah.
Extra attention was paid to it for things like handling, suspension,
whether even just a paint
engine.
color.
It could be anything, but it's special.
Yeah.
It makes it special. And I think that a lot of manufacturers have done a nice job with that. But Acura is bringing that back. So I'm really, really pleased about that. And I'm not surprised to hear that you're getting a larger, younger audience for it. And you have the beautiful blue.
Yep, I've got the Apex Pearl Blue 2019 ILX A-Spec.
Great.
I picked it up this past fall, kind of for the model year closeouts on those, and got myself a good deal. So that it's a color that it just stands out. It's easy to find in the Target parking lot when I go out there, which is nice.
It's eye-catching. It's fantastic.
It's a great looking car. And it's a fun car to drive. It's got a dual clutch transmission, 8-speed. It's about 201 horsepower, so it's not a ton of power, but the transmission kind of makes up for it. It gives it a little bit of agility.
Good.
And so it's a fun car. A lot of the components underneath are basically pulled from the SI Civics in terms of your suspension components. So a lot of people will look at that car as a Civic Si with a dual clutch transmission instead of an automatic. And it's a pretty good comparison.
Well, the Civic Si has been kicking butt.
Yeah,
in terms of lap times, people are very, very pleased with it. I think the styling's a little bit controversial.
Yeah.
If you're a younger driver, that might be fine. If you're looking for something with similar handling and performance characteristics, then the ILX would be the ticket.
Exactly. It's a little bit more of you can drive it in the city a little bit easier without having the manual transmission. It's a little bit more of a relaxed car. It definitely has some more reserved styling, but it's not conservative by any means either. It's a very attractive car, and that redesign, I had never considered the ILX before the redesign, and that's something to Acura where someone who was selling these cars, I was kind of like, I'm kind of iffy about this one, and they redesigned it, and it just looks fantastic.
Good. And if you ever want to check out the ILX, you can head over to Berkeley Acura and ask for David. He's a subject matter expert in not only the NSX, but the ILX because he owns one as well.
Yeah.
And he can take you through all the features and the enhancements of that car. But I don't think that's the car that ticked it off in terms of creating excitement for the Acura brand. The NSX was the one that did that, in my opinion. And so we know it's kind of a storied past with the Gen 1. Had gone through many years of prototyping, concepting, and development for the Gen 2. And eventually it was released in 2017.
Yes.
So in my opinion, I thought that brought a lot of enthusiasm back to the brand. It put them on the performance map.
Yeah, absolutely.
This car, of course, handles well up there with other supercars in its class and is doing extremely well. So we're going to go into topic 2 and talk a little bit more about these two beauties that we have directly behind us.